Hello, and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games, and board games. Today's review is 2012's Cthulhu by Gaslight for Call of Cthulhu's 6th edition by Chaosium. Okay, first a bit of history. Cthulhu by Gaslight is a 192-page softback source book that covers 1890s Victorian Britain. It has been printed twice previously, first in 1986 and secondly in 1988. This is essentially the 3rd edition of Gaslight for the 6th edition of Call of Cthulhu. Okay, to the cover. Here we have an okay piece by Paul Carrick showing Amigo up to no good. Contained with the book we also have a handy map of the City of London. Okay, to the inside. Following the massive list of credits and the contents pages, we have some information on the various editions, followed by the first section, Victorian characters. Here it gives us character classes that tie in with the British Victorian era. It gives a thorough explanation of the effects of social class in the era and the long-reaching effects it has. Of note here is the aristocrat and the consulting detective. A good touch is that where possible they give you an example of this type of character in literature from the period. For example, a consulting detective would be a Sherlock Holmes type. After this we have pages of character traits, interesting quirks that can both help and hinder your investigator, and this is followed by skill alterations for the period, which gives us the much needed pilot balloon. Next it discusses weapons of the period. Most handguns of the time were revolvers, but it also gives us information on rifles, air rifles, shotguns and machine guns from the time. This is followed by a fairly interesting collection of Victorian era terms which definitely add colour to the proceedings, and then we have an explanation of English money with a couple of pages of things to buy. Next up is discussion on clothing from the time, which includes some nice illustrations to use as guidance, and this is succeeded with the next chapter, the Victorian world. This provides us with a fairly decent rundown of Britain's empire, one that stretched as far as Australia and encompassed large portions of Africa and India. It talks about Britain's relations with the rest of the world, including pre-2 World Wars Germany and post-colonial America. We have decent notes on the Victorian military, including the Royal Navy, and then we have the Gaslight era timeline. This details everything from the beginning of the Jack the Ripper murders right the way through to the death of Queen Victoria and the end of the era. It's interesting to point out that during the period of the Ripper murders, London was almost fully lit by electric lighting, not gaslights as many would presume. Examining this timeline highlights the period of productivity and innovation that the UK went through. Following this we have a list of notable personalities of the time. Of note here is the founder of the Theosophical movement, Madame Helena Petrova Blavatsky, authors Lewis Carroll and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, playwrights Gilbert and Sullivan, Rudyard Kipling, Bram Stoker and Oscar Wilde. It also provides us with a timeline of Victorian exploration highlighting the likes of Dr. Livingstone and the ill-fated Franklin expedition. We then have discussion on London itself, with notes on Westminster and the surrounding areas in the south of the Thames. It then gives notes on all of the important places in London, ranging from London Bridge to Madame Tussauds. It also gives us a little interesting piece on how to summon a cab at the time, handy for those attempting to get away from whatever mythos threat is chasing them. It gives us a map of the British Museum and some notes on the thing most associated with the period, the London fog. This includes the in-game effect. This is followed by a map of the Tower of London and a list of the various stores of London where the gentleman can obtain hats, books, clothing, jewellery and clothes. It then gives some brief notes on the accents of the UK, and this is followed by some discussion on the regions of the UK, including the current state of affairs in Ireland, Scotland and Wales. After this, we have information on the travel of the period. It talks about hot air balloons being the only method of air travel, and the huge passenger liners that span the Atlantic. It makes mention of the Thames and how it made London the greatest port in the British Isles. This is followed by some bits on the different types of horse-drawn cabs of the period, and after this we have a fairly pointless map of the railways of Great Britain, which is just a bit too small to read or be useful. We then have a section on the media of the time. The telegraph was the fastest and most reliable method of communication within Great Britain at the time, boasting over 100,000 miles of telegraph wires by 1876. By 1888 the UK had 20,400 telephones in operation, although these were an expensive commodity. It also talks about the superb British postal service as well as paid messengers. Newspaper-wise, London was served by almost 500 in the 1890s, usually near or headquartered at Fleet Street. These ranged from penny weeklies and periodicals to the Times, often featuring artist renditions of events on the covers. Next is a section on crime in London. This details the various criminal classes from the lowly mugger or ramsman to safecrackers or cracksmen. It also discusses prostitution in London and the various levels as to which women catered and how they were regarded. Predictably, this is followed by a section on the law. It gives information on Scotland Yard and the introduction of the Metropolitan Police Force in 1829 by Sir Robert Peel. It talks about CID and Special Branch, and even gives us a handy list of underworld slang. It has game rules on summoning the police, and this is followed by information on the criminology of the time. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it was not hugely developed in the 1890s. Even fingerprints could not be analysed, and most police work was performed by the exhaustive questioning and dogged determination of the CID. It gives details of the court system and what players should do if they fall foul of the law. After this is a section on the late Victorian underworld and a full page on the most notorious serial killer of the time, Jack the Ripper, including theories as to his identity. This is succeeded by information on the British government and how the pecking order of the royalty worked, from the ruling king or queen to knights of the realm. This leads to club life in London, which discusses the various gentlemen's clubs of the period. It moves through hotels and lodgings and the markets and bazaars of the Big Smoke, and this is followed by the various sources of information one might look into, like the London Library and the British Museum. After this we have 2 full pages on coach chase rules, which upon reading really feel like they would work in game, as they have an enjoyable ebb and flow to them. Next we have details on the British universities, and it talks about Oxford, which was founded in 1096 and as such is older than the Aztec Empire, and Cambridge University, which was founded in 1209. It talks about the kind of education you would get there, and then goes on to mention the other universities in the UK. The third chapter is entitled Strange Britain. It talks about the rise of interest in Egyptology in the 1800s, and how Egyptian myth and legend bled into the beliefs of Victorian occultists. Theories of the lost continent of Atlantis had a revival in 1882 with the publication of Ignatius Donnelly's Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, followed by Ragnarok, Age of Fire and Gravel, and he lectured widely on the subject. Neo-Druidism was also popular in this period, and a number of occult groups and magical societies incorporated Druidic practices into their own ceremonies. Most notable amongst these societies was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. It then moves on to discuss the Theosophical Society. This was an occult movement that was founded in 1875 in New York by Madame Helena Blavatsky and was essentially a blend of Eastern and Western mysticism and spiritualism. In 1877 she published Isis Unveiled, which was a mixture of philosophies from various religions and claimed to also contain the magical teachings of Pythagoras. The central tenet to the existence of theosophy was the Mahatmas, ethereal beings of astral wisdom. They supposedly helped her view the original words of the Book of Dizan and understand the words of the now forgotten language of Atlantis, Senzar. Freemasonry was a popular secret society of the Victorian age. Said to have existed since the Middle Ages, it was, by the 18th century, a quasi-religious, exclusive secret society steeped in occult ritual. After this we have a timeline of 14 events that occurred between 1855 and 1905, which contains such bizarre things as red rain falling in Morocco in 1880, and Morgan Robertson's 1898 book Futility, featuring a ship called the Titan being struck by an iceberg on its maiden North Atlantic trip, a full 14 years before the exact same thing happened to the Titanic. It then goes on to talk about the Golden Dawn in detail. The society was first formed in 1888 and dominated Victorian culture for almost a decade. They had the Isis Urania Temple in London, and it has a fairly complex and deep history that I'm not going to go into here, but it is well worth reading about. It is worth pointing out that notorious occultist and wizard Aleister Crowley joined the Golden Dawn in 1898. After this we have a discussion on spiritualism, an incredibly popular occult pastime in Victorian Britain. Many so-called mediums were exposed as clever frauds during this period of popularity. However, despite this, a number of spiritualist churches were formed in Britain at this time. After this it goes on to discuss the Society for Psychical Research, or SPR. Formed in 1882, the SPR consisted of a group of scholars and scientists from Cambridge University who came together to make careful study of paranormal phenomena. The SPR produced Phantasms of the Living in 1886, a 1400-page report on over 700 cases studied, and it was here that the word telepathy was first coined. The SPR, over the coming years, studied and debunked many so-called mediums, similarly finding the powers of Madame Blavatsky of the Theosophical Society to be fraudulent. The SPR attracted the support of many prominent people of the time, including Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Mark Twain and William Gladstone, and continues its work to this very day. I've included a link to their webpage below. The group adheres to a strict scientific principle, which could make it difficult for any mythos-preaching player to join. After this is a gazetteer of selected strange sites in Britain. This covers the length and breadth of the country and includes Ireland. It covers the likes of Loch Ness and its famous monster, Pendle Hill in Lancashire, famous for the witch's coven that supposedly met there, Dunwich, no not that one, the one which has a Franciscan priory that was lost to the sea and whose bell can be heard tolling on stormy nights from the depths, Bodmin Moor, home to the subterranean knockers whose tappings one of the imminent mine collapses, and perhaps Britain's most famous monument, Stonehenge. We then have a section on the Cthulhu mythos. Clearly, the obsession the Victorian era had with the occult makes Britain ripe for the mythos. It gives details on what can be possibly found where, for example, it suggests that the waters off the coast of Newcastle and Sunderland could be the location of buried tombs of one or more Starspawn, as per Brian Lumley's The Night the Sea Maid Went Down. It gives particular attention to the Severn Valley, as this featured heavily in Ramsay Campbell's mythos stories. It's the home of Glarkey, and the labyrinth of the Great Old One Ihort is found beneath the countryside here. It also talks about Goatswood and how Yog Sothoth is worshipped there, and it provides us a map of the region. This is followed by a list of mythos entities that can be plausibly encountered in Victorian Britain, and is succeeded with a new species, the Little People, a race of hateful dwarfs. We have details of the great old one Rogog that appears as a dead black leafless oak tree with a single red eye that it is claimed was formed from the blood of Cthulhu himself. The next section deals with famous Victorian fictional characters. The Keeper is encouraged to use them in their campaign, or even use them as player characters and run a game similar to Alan Moore's superb League of Extraordinary Gentlemen series. It begins with Alan Quatermain, the adventurer of King Solomon's Mines fame, and he is followed by the archetypal Wild West cowboy Buffalo Bill. We then have Captain Nemo, but unfortunately no Nautilus, and this is followed by the daddy of all vampires, Count Dracula. We then have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and it includes the in-game effects for Dr. Jekyll's potion. And this is followed by the foul Dr. Moreau, and gives stats for his beast folk. And then we have Dorian Gray and Fu Manchu, where it also gives us the game effects for his Elixir Vitae. Griffin, the Invisible Man, is next, and then there is a section on the Martian invasion from H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, where it gives us the stats for the Martians themselves and their tripod war machines, and even gives information on how the Keeper could include the Martian invasion in their campaign. It's interesting to note that the events of the book only took place over a 15-day period from invasion to the death of the Martians. After this we have the enigmatic Phantom of the Opera, followed by Phileas Fogg and the Lost World's Professor Challenger. After this we have the villainous Professor Moriarty, Vampire Hunter Professor Van Helsing, and then Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. It's interesting to note that Moriarty has an int of 20 and Holmes has an int of 19, possibly explaining his ability to outwit Holmes as often as he did. Finally, we have the mythical Spring-Heeled Jack and Varney the Vampire from the weekly Penny Dreadful publications, and it finishes with Victor Frankenstein and his creation. After this we have a compendium of Victorian non-player characters for the Keeper to use at a pinch, and then it goes into Victorian scenario suggestions. I found it slightly surprising to find that there are actually a decent number of Gaslight scenarios. Chaosium's Dark Designs collects 3, and Pagan Publishing's The Golden Dawn has extensive background information and 4 scenarios. Additionally, Cubicle 7's Cthulhu Britannica has a scenario, and also Pagan's The Resurrected Volume 3 Out of the Vault has 2. There are also various Chaosium monographs that are useful. We're also given a list of books, stories and sources for Gaslight era inspiration. It also has some details on investigating hauntings of the period and how to deal with Christian exorcism in relation to Lovecraft's mythos. The final chapter is Gaslight Adventures. There will be spoilers from this point on, so stop watching now if you intend to play these. The first scenario is entitled The Night of the Jackals. It begins with us being introduced to an army regiment called the 1st Battalion of the Buffs, and members who, when in an area north of Aswan, heard tale of a cult in the nearby village of Abadan, who, rumour has it, dealt in human sacrifice and terrible magic. Colonel Hollingsworth assembled a makeshift company of around 40 men and attacked the cult, killing them all. He plundered treasures that the cult had, among these some scrolls and a mummy. The scrolls dated back over 4,000 years and told the tale of the mummy, a high priest of the cult, Sekhet Tort, who is prophesied would be reborn into a new world, giving instructions for the high priest's resurrection, which the present-day cult had, despite trying, failed to do. The discovery supposedly bore a curse, which meant that those who had destroyed the cult would die. Several years later, it appears that the curse is taking full effect as members of the Buffs are being discovered murdered. The scenario is an investigative one that involves speaking to the remaining members of the Buffs while tracking down and investigating a strange group of Egyptian men who seem to be involved. It requires a fair understanding of the various levels of military leadership and should ultimately culminate in either the mummy being returned to life and possessing the nearest living human, or stopping the modern day cult. The second scenario is called The Burnt Man. On the face of it, this is a Wicker Man-esque adventure involving the death of a landowner, Sir William Fitzhugh Allington, after he demanded an ancient standing monolith be moved so that the field it was in could be ploughed. The investigators need to travel to windy Dartmoor to find the home of his widow and investigate his supposed murder. Unknown to anybody, those responsible are the Little People, child-sized fairies who are hidden from humans. They sacrifice Sir William upon the stone as punishment for his transgressions, but seek to re-sanctify it with 6 children that they intend to steal from the nearest village Bargrove and Sir William's daughter, Ursula. The scenario takes place between the 14th and 21st of December and involves the investigators looking into the murder. It ultimately culminates in the children being stolen and the investigators hurrying to stop them being burned in a large wooden effigy, quickly followed by a chase on a sleigh across the snow by the Little People and a dark young of Shub-Niggurath. Finally, we have a fairly comprehensive list of sources for Victorian roleplayers and a large section of excellently produced handouts. Cthulhu by Gaslight surprised me in many ways. I'd never played in this era before, but having read this, I realised that this was the game I had imagined Call of Cthulhu all along. Britain at this time just seems a little bit more dangerous than 1930s Call of Cthulhu does. Maybe it's the general absence of guns and the slightly less advanced technology, but I genuinely feel that the British values lend themselves incredibly well to Lovecraft's work. Britain was absolutely steeped in the occult in this period, and the presence of the mythos just seems to fit it like a glove. The inclusion of characters from the fiction of the period is inspired, as they could easily serve as an introduction to many of the wonders of this time. The production values of the book are nice, if a bit grey, and the artwork ranges from decent to really good. The scenarios are really quite different. Where I feel that Night of the Jackals had way too much keeper information, quite a lot of which the players would in all actuality never find out, the Burnt Man felt about right, and was, I feel, the better of the two. That's not to say, however, that this is a perfect piece of work. Social class and standing are a definite sticking point here. Whereas in the US it isn't really a problem if a cab driver knows a dilettante, in Victorian Britain it was a massive issue, and one that, should the game be played in the spirit as it intended, should cause problems for the players. Also, quite why the authors chose such a narrow time period for the book when Queen Victoria's rule was from 1837 to 1901 is a bit puzzling. So much more could have been included had they broadened it. Cthulhu by Gaslight has seen a slight resurgence of late, with Stygian Fox's excellent Hudson and Brand Inquiry Agents of the Obscure. I've linked to it below. But I do feel that this particular version of Cthulhu by Gaslight has been superseded in recent years by Cubicle 7's quite superb Cthulhu Britannica London. But this and the previous editions definitely set the groundwork by which we imagine this time. I give Cthulhu by Gaslight a very respectable 8 out of 10. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to hit the thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and also check out my other reviews. Lastly, if you enjoy what I produce here, then maybe think about supporting me on Patreon. Bud out.